let's talk about some other silks that don't fall into the previous categories. The first is silk crepe. Silk crepe is made with crepe yarns, just like many of the silk fabrics that we've talked about before. And just like wool crepe, it has the same properties associated with crepe yarns, meaning it will have a soft, bouncy drape with a pebbled texture. Although the pebbled texture will be much less pronounced than in the wool crepes that we covered in the wool section. Crepe yarns are spun in both directions, giving them a zigzag quality which produces the texture and bounce associated with these crepe fabrics. Most crepe fabrics, wool or silk, again, are spun or use crepe yarns and are woven with a plain weave. And here in the close-up, you can see the subtle pebbling. Again, it is much more pronounced in wool crepes, but still apparent in silk crepes as well. Silk jersey. We have seen jersey in all other fiber categories, cotton and wool, but it also belongs here. Silk jersey is the rarest type of jersey, as you'll most commonly see cotton jersey, slightly less you'll see wool jersey, and every now and again you'll see silk jersey. And when you do, it's a treat, because it is a beautiful version of this fabric. Like all jerseys, it is a lightweight knit, but carries over all of the lovely movement of silk and has a nice dull sheen to it. It drapes wonderfully, and as a knit has stretch, and so can hug the body and create beautiful shapes and beautiful drapes as it is often used to do in dresses. China silk and habutai. These two fabrics are very similar, and they're both soft, lightweight, lustrous silks that are woven with a tight plain weave. They have a medium limp drape and are very delicate. In many cases, these silk fabrics names can be used almost interchangeably, but originally, habutai is a Japanese silk, and China silk, of course, comes from China. Also, habutai is typically white or natural in color, and China silk has lovely dyed colors. Habutai is also a bit heavier in weight, although there is some overlap. Dupioni. Oh, I gotta correct the spelling. This is the correct spelling. Sorry about that, guys. Add an O and a P. Dupioni is originally an Italian fabric woven with slubbed yarns into a tight plain weave. The weft yarns are heavier, having the slubbing effect in them. This gives the fabric a slightly textured ribbing. We covered Dupioni in our yarn category when we talked about yarns with slubs. Remember that slubs are yarns, or slubbed yarns, have irregular thicknesses. Some have kind of lumps in them and then get thinner, and so on and so forth. They create this slubbed texture in the fabric. They're not very strong, so they're only used in the weft direction, not the warp. They can't hold up to the strength of being pulled on a loom. So they almost never used in the warp direction, almost exclusively in the weft direction. This fabric is very similar to our next fabric, shantung, but is usually heavier in weight with more heavy slubbing. And here we are, shantung. Shantung, again, is almost identical to Dupioni, as they both use the same technique of creating a plain weave fabric with heavier slubbed weft yarns. The two fabrics can be differentiated because shantung is lighter in weight and has less dramatic slubbing. Shantung is crisp and light. Here we can see the two side by side. As you can see, the silk shantung slubbing is very subtle. The Dupioni slubbing is much heavier and textured. Four-ply silk. As we have learned before, plied yarns are yarns that are spun from finer yarns. The number of plies a yarn has lets you know how many yarns were spun to make that one single yarn. For instance, a four-ply silk uses yarns that were spun from 4 finer strands of silk. Whenever we have a plied yarn, it creates a thicker, stronger, denser fabric. Four-ply silk is medium in weight, but again, very dense due to those 4 plied. Because it is dense, it's a bit heavier in weight, which allows for a full-bodied, lovely movement and is known for its beautiful drape. The weight of the fabric makes it move a little bit more differently than a chiffon or a charmeuse, which is quite light, so it sort of picks up and flows in the air. Whereas four-ply silk has a great movement, but is a little bit more weighty in its movement. This fabric is often seen using crepe yarns as well and has a medium luster. Matka. Matka is made with large, slightly irregular yarns that have a subtle slubbing. Not as much as the dupioni or shantung, but enough to make little sort of bubbled textures here and there. It is woven with a basket weave, as we can see here. And if we remember from our woven section, the basket weave is essentially a variation of the plain weave that pairs warp and weft yarns together. It has an over-under pattern, but we sort of clump 2 pairs of weft or 2 pairs of warp together to follow that pattern together. The surface of matka is slightly rough in texture and is medium to heavy in weight. It will have a little bit of a dull sheen, again, because it is silk, but it is quite subtle. Noil. The name of this fabric refers to short, irregular, often waste fibers. In silk, these fibers come from the innermost part of the cocoon. Noil fibers can be found in other fibers and be used to make noil fabrics in different fibers. For instance, you can have noil fibers as a waste product or leftover product from wool as well. In all cases, noil is a medium in weight with a slight crispness and is characterized by rough pebble textures that often sort of look a bit like pilling. And these are created from small bumps in the yarn. Often noil fabrics will have flecks of lighter and darker colors throughout them as well. So here we can see the noil fabric, and again, that sort of kind of rough, almost pebbly. I know I use pebbly a lot, so I'll use something different. Sandy texture to it. Pongee. Pongee is a lightweight plain weave silk fabric similar to China silk or habutai. However, pongee is crisper in drape than either of those fabrics and is a bit more rough on the face, where China silk and habutai have a very smooth face. Also, pongee typically has a duller luster than these other two fabrics. Pongee can be found in different weights, and at its lightest, it can be semi-sheer. Shot silk. Shot silk refers to any fabric that is woven with one color yarn in the weft direction and another contrasting yarn color in the warp direction. The result, especially when woven in silk or synthetic fibers, is an iridescent effect, a sort of two-tone shine, as can be seen here. It's often called tie silk, as many tie silks use this shot process. Many different types of fabrics can use the shot effect, like taffeta, shantung, and others. Sarah. Sarah is a traditionally Indian fabric named for Surat, India. It is a smooth, lightweight twill silk that is usually printed, but can be found in solid colors as well. This fabric is very similar to silk gabardine. Sarah can also be called silk foulard, tie silk, or sometimes just plain silk twill. We don't see a lot of twills in the silk category. We had large categories of wool twills as well as cotton twills. However, silk twills are a bit smaller in number. We can see gabardines, which was a typically wool fabric made from silk, and of course we have Sarah, which stands out as being one of the few twill silks. Taffeta. Taffeta is a famous silk fabric known for its ability to create voluminous silhouettes. So it is stiff and falls out and away from the body. It has a pleasant rustling sound when it moves. This sound has its own name called scroop. Taffeta is a smooth, light to medium weight silk woven with a plain weave with fine, tightly spun yarns and slightly heavier weft yarns. It is fairly stiff and has a moderate to high luster. It was the fabric that was famously adored by Christian Dior, and his first debut collection, the New Look, featured silk so highly, many of the reviewers that attended that show talked of the only sound being the rustling of the taffeta, the scroop. Tussa silk. This fabric is made from wild silk moth cocoons. So, not the species of domesticated silk moth that we talked about earlier. This one is wild, but we still can harvest their cocoons and utilize them to make fiber. However, they are rougher than the cultivated kind. Tussa silk is often left undyed and keep their natural tannish brown color that sort of varies from a darker brown to a lighter tan. The fabrics made from this fiber are usually heavy in weight, stiff, and have a rough texture and uneven color. Velvet. The well-known piled silk fabric. This is a very luxurious fabric and is very expensive when made from silk and not from cheaper synthetic versions. However, even in expensive versions, only the pile is made from silk and the backing is usually rayon. Silk velvet is soft, plush, and limp. It is heavy in weight and has a dull luster. Velvet, velour, or velveteen. We have covered all three thus far. We have covered them in our weaving and knitting sections, as well as in our cotton and now our silk sections. But how the heck do we tell the three apart? They are all piled fabrics that have a very similar appearance. However, they are different. And there are ways that we can use to tell the three apart. All three of these fabrics have an all-over pile creating a plush surface, again, that can be hard to tell them apart at first glance. However, they are all made by using different methods. Traditionally, velvet was made of silk, velveteen is made of cotton, and velour is made of synthetic fibers. However, all three varieties of fabric can be made from any fiber. The true difference between velvet, velour, and velveteen is not the fiber, it's the construction. Velvet is made from weaving a set of weft yarns between two layers of fabric. These yarns are then cut down a space in between the two layers, producing a fabric with a deep, plush pile. So we can see a woven layer of fabric up here, a woven layer of fabric down here, and an extra set of yarns that connect the two. In most cases, this layer will be a synthetic rayon, this will be a synthetic rayon, and only these connecting yarns will be silk. This keeps the price reasonable and does not impede the beauty and luster of silk being shown off in the pile. 100% silk velvets do exist, but they are ridiculously expensive for no reason. Velveteen is made in a different way. It is made by floating weft yarns over many warp yarns. These floats are then cut to create a pile, much in the same way the pile for corduroys are formed. The pile for velveteen is consequently much shorter and less plush than velvet. So as we can see here, we do not have two layers of fabric, we simply have floats. The floats are cut very close to the surface of the fabric, creating a very short cropped pile. So if your pile is quite short and close to the surface of the fabric, you probably have a velveteen. If the pile is plush and long and quite deep, you probably have a velvet. Velour is made in a similar way to velvet, with two layers of a fabric and a set of connecting yarns in between. However, they are different because velvet connects two layers of woven fabrics, velour connects two layers of knit fabrics, as we can see here with the loops connecting each other. Velour uses a warp knitting technique instead of a weft knitting technique. That is, has a variation that adds the connecting yarns in between. Once the two layers have been knit with its connecting yarns, just like velvet, the yarns are cut in between to create the pile. The way we tell the difference between velour and velvet and velveteen is velour will always stretch as it is a knit. It retains the properties of knits, and if we remember, all knits stretch. Now, it can get a little bit complicated because we do have variations of velvet and velveteen that are stretch. These variations add spandex into the fiber content, which allows them to stretch a little bit. However, if you look closely, you can see the knit construction on velour in the backing, because on the face side, the pile can obscure the construction. Velour will also tend to be more stretchy even than the stretch velvet and velveteen varieties. I know it gets complicated, but hopefully you can now tell the difference between velvet, velour, and velveteen.